Have you ever noticed how some people feel tired before the day even begins? Not because they slept poorly, but because they wake up already feeling late for their own life. Maybe you know someone like that, or maybe it's you. This story begins with Andrew, a 35-year-old man who never stayed still. He didn't see himself as anxious. On the contrary, he told himself he was responsible, committed, hard-working. The truth was, Andrew felt uncomfortable whenever he didn't have something to do. The alarm went off early. He got up quickly, almost on impulse, as if staying in bed too long might cause some invisible problem. While brushing his teeth, he was already thinking about what needed to be handled. He drank his coffee with his phone in his hand. Before leaving the house, he was already mentally exhausted. Andrew worked in a typical office, in a role that required organization and quick responses. He was efficient. He met deadlines. He replied to emails fast. He was always available. When something needed to be solved, someone would say, "Talk to Andrew." That made him feel needed. But at the end of the day, when everything finally went quiet, a strange feeling appeared. It wasn't relief. It was a subtle emptiness, hard to explain, as if all that effort had been spent just keeping things running, not building anything real. On weekends, Andrew rarely rested. There was always something pending, a household task, a personal project that never moved forward, a favor for someone else. He kept himself busy even during free time. The idea of simply stopping felt uncomfortable, almost wrong, because stopping meant feeling, and feeling meant facing questions he had been avoiding for years. One night, arriving home later than usual, Andrew dropped onto the couch and stared at the ceiling. His phone was within reach, but for some reason, he didn't pick it up. He stayed there in silence for a few minutes. And he realized something that deeply unsettled him. He couldn't remember the last time he had consciously chosen how to spend his own time. Everything was reaction, everything was response, everything was urgency. The following week, something small happened. An appointment was cancelled at the last minute. Andrew suddenly had 2 free hours in the middle of the afternoon. Instead of feeling relieved, he felt anxious. His mind immediately searched for something to fill the space, anything. He opened his computer, closed it, picked up his phone, put it down, stood up, sat back down, walked around the room. That free time felt too heavy. That's when an uncomfortable thought appeared. If silence bothers me this much, maybe I'm using busyness as an escape. That thought stayed with him over the next few days. Andrew began to observe his routine more closely. He noticed how automatically he said yes. He accepted tasks without evaluating them. He filled his schedule as if empty space were a mistake that needed fixing. He confused being busy with moving forward, but if he was honest with himself, he couldn't say where he was going. In a casual conversation with an older co-worker, he heard something that stuck with him. The man said, almost absent-mindedly, "The problem isn't working too much. It's working without knowing why." Andrew laughed, but felt the weight of the words. That night at home, he tried something different. He sat at the table without any distractions and wrote a simple question on a piece of paper. What am I building with all this effort? The answer didn't come easily. He realized that much of what he did only served to maintain a sense of usefulness, to avoid the insecurity of not knowing what the next real step was. Being busy gave the illusion of progress without requiring direction. Andrew began to understand something uncomfortable. Being constantly busy protected him from having to decide. Deciding required responsibility. Deciding required letting go of things. Deciding required admitting that not everything filling his days actually made sense. Little by little, he began creating small pauses. Not big changes, just conscious interruptions. Before accepting something, he asked himself whether it really needed to be done by him. Before filling free time, he asked whether he was escaping or choosing. At first it was difficult. Leaving empty spaces felt strange, as if he were being unproductive, as if he were wasting time. But over time, he realized that what he had been wasting before was attention, energy, and clarity. Andrew started to notice something important. The people around him continued living normally, even when he wasn't available all the time. The world didn't collapse. Urgencies faded. And in the middle of that, he began to breathe more easily. It wasn't a grand transformation. It was quiet, internal. He still had responsibilities. He still worked hard. But now he was beginning to choose more consciously where he placed his time. And that changed everything. Andrew realized that always being busy wasn't a sign of strength. Many times, it was a sign of fear. Fear of stopping, fear of looking at his own life without distractions, fear of discovering that he had been keeping himself busy to avoid the emptiness of not knowing what he truly wanted. That realization didn't bring immediate answers, but it brought something more valuable: clarity. And clarity is the first step toward any real change. Andrew didn't change all at once, and maybe that's what makes this story more honest. In the days that followed, he kept waking up early, going to work, completing tasks. On the outside, everything looked the same. But inside, something had shifted, as if a lens had been adjusted. He could no longer ignore the difference between being busy and being present. He began to notice how often he said yes out of impulse, not out of conviction, but out of fear of seeming useless. How many times he took on one more responsibility just to avoid the discomfort of saying no. How often he filled his days to avoid dealing with the feeling of being lost. One ordinary morning, something simple happened. A co-worker asked for help with something Andrew would normally take on without thinking. He opened his mouth to say, "Sure," and stopped. Not out of anger, not out of rebellion, but out of honesty. He realized that if he accepted, he would once again be postponing something important to himself. He took a deep breath and replied, "I can't today." The world didn't end. The co-worker found another solution. It was small, but for Andrew, it was huge. For the first time in a long while, he felt that he had consciously chosen how to use his own time. It wasn't comfortable. There was guilt. There was insecurity. But there was also something new: self-respect. With more space in his schedule came thoughts that had once been drowned out by noise, old questions, forgotten desires, not ready-made answers, but signals. Andrew realized that always being busy had been a way to avoid exactly this: listening. Listening hurts, because listening forces you to act. He started setting aside small moments of silence, not to produce, but to think. Walks without his phone, coffee without a screen. At first, his mind kept racing. Then it began to slow down, and with that, clarity appeared. Andrew understood something important. Most people aren't exhausted because they do too much. They're exhausted because they do too much of what doesn't make sense. Energy isn't lost only through effort. It's lost through disconnection. Over time, he began to realize that his life didn't need more tasks, but more intention. It didn't need to be filled, but directed. It didn't need to be accelerated, but aligned. None of this was announced. There were no big speeches, no public promises. There were only quiet decisions, repeated day after day, choosing more carefully, pausing before accepting, creating space before filling it. Andrew still felt busy at times. The difference was that now he knew why, and that changed everything. One quiet night, sitting alone, he asked himself a question he had never truly had the courage to face. If I keep living exactly like this, where will I be in 5 years? He didn't like the answer, but it was honest, and that was enough for him to know he needed to keep changing. Maybe this is the hardest part to accept. Always being busy is not a sign of success. Many times, it's just a sign of escape. A polished escape, socially accepted, even admired. But still, escape. Because when you're always busy, you don't have to decide. You don't have to choose. You don't have to face your own life head on. And now, the inevitable question reaches you. If this story made you uncomfortable, don't ignore it. Discomfort is an invitation. Pause for a moment and be honest with yourself. What is filling your days without taking you anywhere? Write it in the comments. Not to expose yourself, but to take ownership. Naming it is the first step toward change. And if you want to keep listening to stories that don't shout, don't promise shortcuts, but help you think more clearly and live with more intention, subscribe to the channel. Here, every story is a mirror, and every video is a chance to choose better. Because living busy is easy, living consciously is hard, and that decision is yours.